Alright, so for my person I did my research on was Ruth Nichols, and she was born on February 23rd, 1901. She's an American aviator. She's one of the world's most noted women in aeronautics, and she started flying at Wellesley College, graduating in 1924. And for her accomplishments, in 1922, she co-piloted the first nonstop flight from New York to Miami, which she actually made honors for in college, and she also did that on a seaplane. She was the first American woman to be a licensed sea pilot. She had an airplane and engine mechanic certificate, and in 1929, she was a third in history and first woman to land in, and at the time, what was all of the 48 states in the U.S. And then for records, she's the only woman at the time to set world records for speed, altitude, and long distance. So on March 6, 1931, she established the women's altitude record at 28,743 feet. And she achieved the women's speed record at 210.754 miles per hour. And she set the women's nonstop distance record at 1,977 miles. In 1932, she made a transcontinental speed record of 13 hours and 21 minutes. And this long distance record that she made, she was actually in a plaster cast and steel corset as 3 months before she was in a crash where she fractured 4 vertebrae and crushed her 5th. And then more of her accomplishments, she's the first woman to attempt a solo transatlantic crossing. She's the first woman in the world to fly as a pilot for a passenger-carrying airline, which was for New England Airlines in 1932. And she entered the first women's transcontinental derby. However, on the second to last, or like the lap before the final lap, she was in third and her plane crashed, and she flew about 140 different aircraft models. And some of her additional accomplishments, she was an organizer for aviation clubs, and for one of them, she teamed with Amelia Earhart to create policy and create a constitution and advance the club forward for a women's pilot club called the 99s, because at the time there were 99 women pilots in part of the club. She lectured at colleges on aerodynamics, navigation, and aerology. She was the first female staff member of an aviation magazine. She was one of 3 of the most outstanding women air pioneers, according to the General Federation of Women's Clubs in 1940. Then she also helped form Relief Wings, which was an airborne ambulance corps, and that was formed during World War II to help the U.S. prepare for their entry. And these centers that were created around the U.S., they became the government civilian air patrol. And then she also flew around the world to gather data for the UN on the effects of the war on children. And then in 1957, she wrote a book called Wings for Life about her experiences as a pilot. So she's very adventurous, but it was also really important for her to help other people. She had a really big heart. And then finally, for her impact, she helped women be seen as more serious in aviation with her accomplishments, such as with the racing. And she was and still is regarded as a heroine for all of her accomplishments in aviation as a woman, as it's a very male-dominated industry. And lastly, but not the least important, she used her heart to help those affected by the war. She was always wanting to help others, and that was what helped drive her to continue on and keep making these accomplishments. And then finally, for my resources, and we got 2 books for the second and the third, and that is all.